se va. Cumba, 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 cumbachero. Bongo, 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 bongo cero. Riquiti que la zona del cumbachero. Bongo cero que se va. Bongo cero que se va. Y suena así el tambor. Riquiti. Ay, tucutumba. Y vuelve a repicar. Riquiti.
Welcome to tonight's program, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about some current events. In particular, we're going to be talking about the immigration issue that is occurring right now on our southern border. Today is July 3rd, the day before the Independence Day, and we're going to try to get this out as soon as possible. But this is something that's right up our alley, and it deals with a humanitarian issue that's manifesting itself, and how people are just kinds of things are being done at the expense of these young people who are coming from desperate situations to the promised land, and all of a sudden it looks like we've lost our bearings, that we really don't stand for what the Statue of Liberty calls for. We don't stand for taking care of other human beings. We really are a nation of haters, and then there are people getting killed all over the Middle East, and we're sending them billions and billions of dollars for refugee relief. And while we have no business over there other than the value of the oil, the almighty oil. And we're willing to sacrifice blood and treasure for that. And we have an immigration system here in America that is very complex, and yet it seems that we have such a short memory that we're willing to forget about the fact that we have a broken system and focus in almost exclusively on these young people coming over the border. And so the haters, they're taking advantage of it and trying to politicize it by making it out to be Obama's a failure and to do anything on immigration, when we know for a fact that it's the Congress that's refusing to take action on this issue. We also know that the media is taking this issue and focusing it, and it's creating energy, dissent on the part of some members of society, American society, that don't want these people here, that they're bringing in quote-unquote diseases, gang members. They're just politicizing and making this a hateful issue, when in fact, in the reality is that this thing that's happening or occurring on the border today is just a really small component of the greater issue. I mean, it almost deals exclusively with the globalization that's now taking hold of the whole world, and where we have to depend a lot on cheap labor as part of that third world globalization that we're all part of now. When we see the middle class dying, when we see wages stagnant, and we have to rely on as a capitalistic system for cheap labor to make that system operate, then you're going to have what's happening now is an influx of cheap labor. People willing to, where $7 an hour is a big thing. Uh, so you have to put it in proper perspective, and that is, what kind of life do I have, or does an individual have, that would make $7 an hour attractive? And it's the reality that people live in these societies that are right next door, in conditions that are worse than we could probably imagine. And that $7 an hour, it's as good as being $700 an hour to some of these individuals, and they're willing to risk their life and what have you to come to the promised land. We are a land of immigrants, but like I said before, you got to be the right color in order to be the right immigrant that they'll accept here. But I want to say something with respect to the hegemony. I always get back to the hegemony and the fact that we have a racist society, and you can see that on full view as what I see on the television these days, where you have people from Murrieta or Murrieta, California, coming out and protesting against these busloads of refugees coming from Central America, and telling them to go back to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And all of a sudden, the immigration issue it becomes a Central American issue, no longer a Mexican issue. They somehow want to take the emphasis out of that. But the thing that really kind of frosts me, as they say, is the fact that it's brown on brown. A lot of those people who are protesting these buses and the arrival of these children are Mexicans or of Mexican descent. Americans of Mexican descent who are second and third generations, and that's because they've been through a racist system that actually makes them self-haters. And so if you're a self-hater, that means that you're going to hate anything that reflects upon you. And if these individuals are coming over and they look like you, but they have all of this racist baggage, the stereotypical baggage that they're carrying with them, you're gonna because you live next door and you work so hard to be accepted by your white neighbor, you can't really survive in this society if you show your neighbor any kind of humanity towards these people that they have learned to hate. You're not going to be well accepted in your community, and so you go right along with them. You not only go along with them, you give them a ride to the rally, and you stand there holding hands with these racists and telling these other brown people to go back where they came from. That's a sickness. It's part of our society, and that's what I got to tell politicians. And that is the Latinization, the Latinos, is such a complex issue. The issue of immigration is so complex that you try to paint it with one big broad brush under this thing called Latino, that it hurts even when you're trying to do something honestly, when you're trying to address an issue on its merits, because you've already poisoned the water so much, and you've created this impression of people that it's going to take. You have to brainwash them back to a different level of understanding in order for them to behave. This thing's going to get out of control if we're not careful. And what I'm saying is that on the immigration issue, we know that let's say there's 12 million, and I've said this before, undocumented people in the United States. Well, 60% of those 12 million came over vis-a-vis the southern border or the northern border or whatever. But 40% are people who were here legally and just overstayed their visas. And so, if you're smart, you have an ounce of integrity or brain in you, you understand that 40% of 12 million is a lot of people. And that immigration, as immigration is a complex issue, it involves 12 million people, and there are different aspects, different ethnic groups, different reasons for people being here undocumented. And until we fix that program, that process, those laws, we're always going to have what we have now. And that is, we have 12 million people who exist in our midst, and nobody does anything about it. On the other hand, you have the what I call the acculturation or the brainwashing of people of color like myself, who don't fit into the America's dominant society, or what it pictures as Native American. They always say Native Americans. They say white people are Native Americans, and everybody else is minority or comes from some other place. And so a person like me, who's a third generation American of Mexican descent, we think, we act like as if we're Americans, just pure Americans. And so when we see another quote unquote minority looking person, that's not us. It's not us. We're white. We've been brainwashed. But we know deep down in our hearts, we know within ourselves that that person with the mustache and black hair looks sort of native, is poor, comes from the southern hemisphere, and everything that's been said about them is ugly and stereotypically racist. We don't want to be associated with them, but yet, and you know it yourself, that in today's society, I remember when I was in the hospital, I spent a lot of time in the hospital here in 2010. It never ceased to amaze me how many doctors would ask me what part of Mexico I came from. How many nurses would ask me. And some of them were real sensitive, and they kind of led. And then when they found out that I spoke Spanish, they were just, it was like culture shock to them. I was really something. Here's a person that's educated, speaks perfect English, or at least I think I speak perfect English, and yet he's bilingual. He's a strange person. But in a way, he's kind of talented. Well, a lot of people like me, not like they care for me, who are similar to me, we are self-haters. And we look at the immigration issue as their problem, not our problem. That the way society portrays these young kids coming from Central America is the way that I look at them, as being invaders, as being intruders, never knowing that the guy who's sitting next to me, he thinks just by looking at me that I must be a foreigner. See? And that's reality. But yet we vote. You think that and I'm going to use my own family as an example here. There are no more purebloods in my family, my immediate family. My wife and I have 8 children between us. We have 8 grandkids and 4 great grandbabies. And not one of them chose to marry another Mexican. American of Mexican descent. And so if you see my babies, if you see our offsprings, they're beginning to look more and more like things that you would accept. Except they have the last name, but they know nothing about their Mexican culture per se. And so they, while they're counted in the what would I say, the census as being minorities, they don't see themselves minorities, and their voting is strictly based a lot of times on merit and not on party. And so it is important for the parties then to educate themselves and understand that there's a certain strata of the voting people, the people who vote, that is a lot different than this immigration strata. The one that are recently retired, or first generation immigrants who have as a priority the issue of immigration. So, if you believe that the immigration is the only issue that's going to draw to you people of color, you're wrong. And both parties are wrong, Democrat and the Republican. You know why? Because you're ignorant. You're ignorant of the realities associated with the demographics. And until you understand the differences, until you can engage the issues that are going on in the border, along the border right now, you do not have credible leadership. And I mean in terms of political leadership that's going to be able to deal with this issue in an issue that has merit. Because there are legal issues associated with this issue. There are political issues that are associated with these young people. And there's economic issues. And the economic issue is what I talked about, the globalization. The political issue is how both sides, one side's trying to demonize and play off of people like me who have been brainwashed into thinking that anything brown is suspicious and you should be afraid of them, and they're full of disease and they're downtrodden and they're going to bring down society. And then you have the law that says we should treat immigrants this way. This is the process. But the law is broken. And we don't have any contingency plans per se. And everybody is not talking about the law. There is a law that deals with individuals like the children coming across the border who find themselves here. And there is a process that mandates by law what is supposed to happen to these children. But then you have these politicians who are just, and the media who's looking at the energy, all of the confrontations that are going on, and not doing anything about helping people. And that's dangerous. I've always said that we're on the precipice of a revolution. And I've always said that revolutions, in my opinion, as I looked at the 60s and 70s, they all started with little sporadic, a flare up here, a flare up there. We never got to the place where it was army versus army, although some marches did manifest themselves that way. But a lot of people were hurt. And the only difference now is that we have a brown demographic, a colored demographic that cannot be changed. And the sooner we deal with that, the sooner we educate and inform ourselves about that issue, we'll be able to address these problems that manifest themselves because we have a broken immigration system. And I would call on each and every one of you to educate yourself, to make yourself familiar and understand exactly what your responsibilities are as a society, what your rights are, and how you should hold these people accountable. You gotta go out and vote. Vote.
Sorry, but I'm a cold. The protection of children is a core priority for UNHCR globally, as they are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, especially those who are unaccompanied or have been separated from their families. And although children moving across borders alone is a growing global phenomenon, the problem itself is not new. We have been providing protection to unaccompanied and separated children since the beginning, including during the Vietnamese boat people crisis, the Sudanese civil war, and most recently in the countries neighboring Syria, where we have one of the most dramatic situations for millions of children in the world. Here in the Americas, we have seen a troubling new trend in recent years. As organized crime and violence have increased dramatically in Mexico and Central America, more and more people are seeking asylum in the region and the United States in particular because of that. And it is especially alarming that the number of children making this dangerous journey alone has doubled each year since 2010. Some 60,000 minors are expected to seek safety on US soil this year, mainly originating from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. So you have to ask yourself, who are these children and why are they fleeing? And these questions were at the origin of the report we are launching today, Children on the Run. And it's based on UNHCR's work together with US authorities to improve the protection screening of unaccompanied and separate children at the southern border and on individual interviews with over 400 of them. The primary objective of the study was to better understand these children's reason for leaving their home countries and to assess the extent to which they may have international protection needs. And this, I think, is the crucial question, because for many observers, there might be the opinion, okay, these are children moving, they are part of a migration flow, they should be dealt with in accordance to general human rights law, or taking into account humanitarian considerations, but they are not entitled to receive international protection according to international law. And what this has demonstrated is that in many situations, there is indeed a question of international protection that is required for many, many of these children. And although not the focus of today's report, our research has also documented the hardship and abuses that these children endured while trying to reach the US. The stories they told us made clear what was at risk if they stayed home and why they made the journey alone, illustrating the humanitarian impact of the violence in the region on these children and the decisions it forced them to make. We found that the large majority of these children may very well have international protection concerns, fleeing armed actors, persecution, violence in their communities, and abuse in their homes. And most of them had one thing in common, their conviction that their states were unable to protect them. And it's also very important that this is not looked at as if it was an anathema for the states, the countries of origin. We are not dealing with state persecution. We are dealing with non-state agents of persecution. And it's perfectly understandable that in situations of generalized violence and organized crime, states, even with the best possible intentions and the best possible laws, might not have the capacity to protect these people. And so the fact that it has happened, it's not something that would lead us to condemn the states. On the contrary, we have witnessed more and more awareness in countries of origin for the need for international protection to be granted, but it needs to motivate us to recognize that there is indeed the case for, in many situations, even refugee status to be considered. Our central conclusion from the study is therefore that unaccompanied and separate children from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico should generally be screened for international protection needs. and we must uphold the human rights of the child as laid out in the relevant international and regional instruments, as well as the right to seek asylum and protection under the 51 Convention and the 67 Protocol. In a few weeks' time, UNHCR, with the support of the European Commission, will release a similar report based on interviews with 270 unaccompanied children from Central America reaching Mexico's southern border. And similar to the situation UNHCR found in the United States, those interviews indicate that the dramatically high levels of violence affecting Central America also contribute to more and more unaccompanied children seeking safety in Mexico itself, some 5,500 in 2013 alone, which means countries of origin, countries of transit, countries of destination can sometimes be the same country. And this needs to be seen in a global perspective. And again, it's not to create any anathema on anybody, it's to try to seek a form of altogether working for these people to find adequate protection.